Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining us for another installment of the Manufacturer's Efficiency webinar series. My name is Matt Wiseman. I'm a certified business leadership coach and exit planning advisor. With me, as always, is Gina Tabasso of Barracuda B2B Marketing and Rich Bello of Schooley Mitchell. This month, we're talking about succession planning. It's perhaps not the first thing you think of when you're considering ways to make your business, your plant more efficient, but as I'll get into during this presentation, having a comprehensive succession plan, succession process is a key component of an efficient organization. So first, what is succession planning? There are lots of definitions out there, but a relatively simple one comes from the University of Washington Human Resources Office. Succession planning is ultimately all about the process of identifying the critical roles or the key people in your organization and creating and deploying a dedicated process to ensure that those roles will be occupied by high performers into the future. So why is it critical to your business? Well, think of someone you consider key to your organization. They could be a longtime employee who has lots of history and knowledge about the business. It could be someone who's responsible for a process that you consider to be a core competency or a differentiator for your business. Regardless of the reason or the reasons you consider an individual to be key, if they walked into your office tomorrow and said, "Hey, boss, I'm giving my 2 weeks notice," or worse, "Boss, I've got this medical issue. I'm going to be out for a while." Do you know what you would do in those situations? Do you already have someone identified who can readily step into the role with little to no interruption to operations? And the situation I just described is one scenario that plays out at businesses every day, and it's one that a solid succession plan can prepare for. Good succession planning can help your business look a few steps ahead and potentially find skills gaps in the organization before they become emergencies. Furthermore, and I hear this time and time again from the business owners that I work with or department leads struggling to retain employees, a solid succession plan is a path to addressing turnover. It's if you have a succession plan in place that's well publicized, that the employees in your business know about it, then they see that there is a path to advancement. They see that there's, if they desire, they can move up in the organization through an established process. They can develop other skills to help them take on other roles within the company. And, this is just one of the many positive impacts that can be gained from the implementation of a robust succession plan. And perhaps the most important of which is that it supports your overall business strategy. You can't have an executable mid to long-term strategic business plan if you don't have the bench strength needed to support it with your employees. And that's where succession planning comes in. So to just talk about what's important about, or why succession planning is so critical and the impact of succession planning. Of respondents to a 2021 PwC survey of family-owned businesses, only 34% had a succession plan in place. These are family-owned businesses, some of which were probably owned by generations of family members. Now, granted, just because a business is a family business, it doesn't mean it has to stay over time. It has to stay within the family. But you would think that, if nothing else, the family would want the business to live on beyond, the current ownership. They would want the legacy preserved, and that's why, or one way, one plan can address that. So, granted, our target audience for this webinar is not typically the large companies that would make up this S&P 1500 index, but just to put some numbers out there. There's an estimated $1 trillion in value erosion due to lack of succession planning in these larger organizations, and that's just for their C-suite executives. Not having a succession plan in place for their C-suite is leading to an estimated $1 trillion in value erosion. So you can imagine just for those organizations, if they went through their entire organizational chart and tallied up the cost of not having a succession plan, the number would be absolutely staggering, let alone all the small businesses that are out there that don't have a succession plan. So how do we go about putting succession plans in place? So what I'm going to present is a very high-level overview, but it'll give you a good feel for what is involved in putting a succession plan and getting one up and running in your business. So as with anything we're doing, we want to consider our overall business strategic objectives. I'll talk more about why that's important later on. But once you've done that, then start documenting a framework for your succession plan. I prefer to kind of outline things, the key pieces I want in a process, in a succession plan, and then using that to build out a standard template for the process to help build it out. Some key considerations for a succession process is how will you go about identifying where those successors are most critically needed? How you go about determining what those roles are? How well your successors and the predecessors for positions and the successors that you're going to train, how will those people be identified? Don't make the mistake of not putting an incentive plan in place for the predecessors and the successors. If you think you can't afford it, then try putting a dollar figure to the cost of, again, having one of your key people all of a sudden not be available. What is the impact? What is the value of the impact of the business in that situation? I guarantee by incentivizing the predecessors and successors for this process, it's going to be a far lower number than not having a good succession plan in place. You also want to establish roles and responsibilities for the process, your RACI matrix, if you will. Who's going to own the process, who's going to be responsible for making sure it's well executed. You're going to want to establish communication protocol, which I'll talk about more in a minute. How the predecessors and successors should be communicating with one another and how often. You're going to, that's going to be driven by the urgency with, the getting a successor in place for a given role, how critical the role is to your business. That'll drive, what the communication cadence needs to be. And then finally, how are you going to track the progress you're making on implementing a succession plan? How will you monitor it once it is in place? And that's going to be all about metrics, which again, I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. So again, to highlight just a few key parts of a process, and within your process you're putting in place, communication is key. Want to make sure you're hitting the 5 W's as you develop your process. Who should be involved and how often communication takes place with everyone involved in the process. What needs to be communicated? This should include not only communication that goes on within the process, but also make sure that you're communicating with those outside of the process, and so those who are not directly involved understand that a succession plan exists. You never want to create some process where the only people who know about something that spans your entire business, is the only people who are involved in it know about it. You want everyone to be aware that, hey, we're implementing succession planning in the organization, and these are the people who are going to be responsible for it, and here's why we're doing it. Not doing that is only going to feed the rumor mill. And that's never a good thing to have in a company, is rumors driving people's actions and or inaction. Also want to just touch on metrics. You can't track what you don't measure. So we're going to want to get some metrics in place to track the the implementation of the program and its effectiveness. You also want to make sure it doesn't fall by the wayside over time. So you want to be, again, monitoring these metrics continuously to make sure that the process stays active and up and running in the business. But conversely, you don't want to create analysis paralysis and have too many metrics to track. So I always recommend just tracking, 3 to 5 metrics at most for a given process to monitor its health. So once you've got, a first framework or first draft in place for your succession plan, where do you start? Well, you've got to pilot the process. It's definitely always my recommendation. Don't just kind of write up a draft and then deploy it. Let's pilot it with one role or at least a few roles before we fully deploy it. So best place to start, or one place to start, is to review your org chart or your employee list and look at all the positions you have in your organization. In an ideal state, of course, you would want to, have successors for every role or every person in your company, but we know that's not feasible. So, not to mention that if you're implementing a succession planning process for the first time, you never want to take a boil the ocean approach. So, let's pick just what we consider the critical roles in the organization or the key people in the organization as to where we're going to start. And then really want to just narrow it down even further and again pick 1, maybe 2 positions at tops, and then identify what are the key roles and responsibilities for that role. Again, can't attack them all. Can't try to cover every single thing a person is responsible for. So let's just pinpoint the key things, the key KPIs they're responsible for, the key processes they own, and pick those things out as where we're going to start focusing for the pilot of our succession plan process, and that's what we're going to move forward with for the implementation. So now that we've identified, our predecessor and their role and what their key responsibilities are, we want to find a successor. It's not as simple as just looking at the predecessor or the current position in that person in that role, looking at who their direct reports are and picking one. We've got to be really careful about who we choose to be a potential successor for a given role. So you need to look at, the role, the current role itself, and think about who in your organization may be a good fit. It could be a direct report for that individual, but you also want to look across the organization who's got the right attitude, the right skills, complementary skills that could be a good fit for the role you're trying to find a successor for, and then go and talk to those individuals to kind of determine do they have an interest. If they're not interested in the opportunity to step into another role or step up, if you will, then they're not the right fit. You don't want to force somebody into a role, and you don't want to make them feel like they have no choice but to accept it. So once you find those a few individuals that say, yeah, I'd be interested in being a backup or being a successor or having that be my next role in the company, you then want to interview them. Just because they talk about interest or because they express interest doesn't mean they're the right fit. So put them through an interview process just like you would through for an external candidate to make sure that the individual will actually be a good fit for the role. And so use very open-ended questions through the interview process to really, again, evaluate this person's abilities. And I also recommend, try leveraging assessments, specifically job benchmarking assessments. This is something that I leverage with my clients to help them when they're interviewing somebody, an external candidate for a position, but it can also be extremely effective for identifying good internal candidates to make sure that their behavioral profile, if you will, is going to be a good fit for this role, and that they can be trained for the role, and that they're going to do well in it. So, these are some tools that can be brought to the process to, again, evaluate a candidate's potential ability to step into a role. So once we've done that, we've got our role identified that we're going to pilot our succession plan on, and we've got a successor or maybe a couple of successors. Then we're going to kick off our pilot effort, and along the way, we want to make sure we're using this pilot to capture any issues with the process. Document things that went well, things that didn't go so well, so that we can revise the process as we go. So that it's really well designed once it is fully deployed. So we want to make sure that the predecessor understands that they need to be documenting the things that they're going to be training their successor on. That's going to help, again, build out the succession planning process. It's also going to help build up a standard operating procedure, if you will, for the role. So this becomes a document in your standard operating process library, if you will, that can be used going forward throughout, for years to come. And again, be sure you're capturing those comments from the predecessor, from the successor, as to how things are going, so that you can feed that into refinements to the overall process. I do definitely want to highlight some key pitfalls and challenges when it comes to implementing a succession process. I won't hit on all of these, but I'll highlight some of the key ones. The key is that the reason that a business is implementing a succession plan is not communicated across the entire organization. So if today sharing knowledge is not, between your employees, is not part of your company's culture, and then all of a sudden you're going to your longtime employees, your key employees, and you're telling them that, hey, you need to start handing down your knowledge. You need to start training junior employees on the things and the things you do. What do you think their first thought is going to be? It's that they're going to think, oh man, I'm going to be replaced by somebody who will do this job for less money, or or I'm on a short list for the next reduction in force, if God forbid one has to happen. And so you don't want that to be the mentality. You want them to understand that there's a strategic initiative that is being rolled out across the organization to reduce risk and help the company be more robust and have good contingency plans in place. So you want to make sure that you're communicating the reasons that succession planning is being implemented in the company. Another one, the successors are not aware. As silly as this sounds, there's a lot of companies that think that succession planning is looking at the org chart and saying, oh well, Bob's successor is going to be Mary, like Mary reports into Bob today, so that's who his successor would be if Bob leaves the company for any reason, and that's where they stop their succession planning, and that is not a succession plan. That's not how it works. So if the successor is not even aware that that's what their intended next step is going to be, that they're intended to be the person that steps into a role, if somebody leaves, then you don't have a succession plan. Another key, challenge is that if a suitable successor does not actually exist in the organization, then yeah, you may need to go outside and hire someone, or you may need to find an alternative solution, like finding an outside consultant, or one of your suppliers who could take on a task, for you if one of your key people leaves and you don't have an internal successor. So you want to, you always want to find some path to have a key person in a key role. You want to have somewhere for their work to go, even if it's an outside source. And finally, again, not considering your company's overall strategic plan in the development of your succession plan, or the carrying out of your succession plan. You don't want to be putting a lot of effort into finding a successor for a role that may not be in your company in 6 or 12 months down the road, depending on what your overall strategic plan is. You may want to come up with kind of a short-term fix for a given role. So not considering your overall strategic plan is key, and something you want to make sure you're doing. So as with all of our webinars, we tend to throw a lot of information out there in a short period of time. So I do just want to highlight some of the takeaways here. Again, succession planning is not another way of developing a successful and efficient business. You cannot operate efficiently without a solid backup plan for your key roles and key employees. Design your process and pilot it. Again, don't just design it and get a draft and then throw it out there and expect it to work well. Take it through a few roles within your company to hammer out all the kinks before you fully deploy it. For any process in your business, again, communication is absolutely key. You want to make sure communication is solid within the process, but also that others within your organization who are not directly involved understand why the process is being deployed. And with anything you're going to, again, track and improve, you want to have metrics in place to monitor progress and monitor how well it's working. Select the successors based on their desire for the role, but also make sure that they're going to be a good fit through using open interviewing questions and benchmarking assessments. And like I said, with everything you do in your business, you want to be, bouncing that off your strategic plan to make sure that it is in alignment and that it supports your business's overall strategic objectives. Again, this webinar is presented by the Manufacturers Efficiency Group, which is myself, Matt Wiseman, Exit Planning Advisor and Focal Point Business Leadership Coach. Rich Bello, Senior Partner with Schooley Mitchell, and Gina Tabasso, Founder of Barracuda BDB Marketing. If you want to know more about what we've presented on today, and or just have a conversation with us about one of our other previous webinar topics, please use the QR codes on the screen here to reach out to us. We'd be happy to have a conversation and see how we can help. And just to promote some of our upcoming webinar content, in December, we've got Rich Bello, who's going to talk about getting to the bottom of merchant services fees. In January, Gina will talk about how to accelerate the sales cycle process without burning out your team. And then in February, I will talk about strategic planning and how that is the ultimate way to drive efficiency in your business. With that, I do want to thank everybody for watching this webinar, and I'll open it up to Gina and Rich if there's anything you want to add or any questions you have.
Yeah, I thought, Matt, the point that you made in regards to communication of the succession plan and why it's being done was an important one to hopefully gain the buy-in of your predecessors. But what if that is all done and explained as well as it can be, but you still have some people in their current positions that are hesitant or unwilling to comply and to participate in the succession planning process? How do you handle that to be able to continue forward with your succession plan if you're not getting that buy-in from your predecessors, the key stakeholders?
Yeah, great question. So in addition to just the broad communication about, why the succession plan is being rolled out, in all hands meetings and whatnot, you want to be promoting it and talking about it and explaining why. But then then you want to be having those one-on-one conversations with the predecessors, and addressing their concerns. Providing uh, a venue where they can, openly communicate, their concerns, and talk about, why why they think that it's maybe not the right thing to do. And then, again, I'm gonna mention that incentive process, kind of. If you are the person driving the succession plan, promoting the succession plan, um, going to your predecessors and saying, look, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're making this part of your goals and objectives, if you will, for the upcoming year, predecessor. And if you complete these goals and objectives, as specifically with the rollout of this succession plan, here's what's in it for you. Here's we're going to give you. There's going to be a bonus, or there's going to be a raise, tied to you completing this and helping us out with this. Then if you're still facing a lot of resistance, then maybe some stronger language needs to be used. I mean, hopefully, if you've got somebody who's got this kind of attitude about their work, in all due respect, hopefully you've already weeded them out of your organization. I mean, this is never these people who put up that level of resistance to rolling out new things within the business. They're never good for a company's culture. So, yeah, it can happen, but hopefully you can provide enough incentive, or maybe look, I just kind of thinking out loud. It is finding out what is going to be the something that's going to motivate them to participate and engage in the succession process and training the next generation, if you will. Maybe it's not a monetary incentive, maybe it's something else, and offering that up to them. So there's a few paths, but hopefully businesses don't run into just such strong resistance that somebody just outright refuses no matter what, because that can certainly be a real challenge, and then you may have to have a more difficult conversation with them.
Then to the opposite end of that spectrum, if you've gone through the succession planning and the predecessor or the predecessor was on board, they provided the information that they needed to allow you to set up this great succession plan, and you've identified the successors and think you have good people in place, they're excited about it. What happens if the predecessor stays around for too long, to the point where the successor is starting to get antsy? They were excited about, having this new opportunity. How do you balance that when you've gotten their hopes up that they're going to have this chance to take on a new role at some point? Like, what is the balancing mechanism to prevent those people from starting to look elsewhere if that opportunity doesn't present itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think you communicate the intent, that it is first and foremost a risk reduction, a means of risk reduction. It's a means of contingency planning for the business, and that them being trained is so that in the event of some emergency situation, they can step into the role quickly. But that, and it depends on the situation. Yes, it could be that the predecessor does have a fixed timeline, that they're, nearing retirement and they intend to leave by a certain date. Those are obviously the easier ones, where it's a clear timeline for the successor. In other situations, you explain that, look, this is, even if this role does not open up in the near term, it does not prevent them from pursuing other roles in the business. In fact, it further, I would say communicate that it further, it makes them even more attractive. I mean, right? They have that much more knowledge of what goes on in the business, even if they ultimately step into a role that is different than the one they're a successor for. They'll just have that more knowledge, more general knowledge about things, how different parts of the business work. So it doesn't preclude them from stepping into a different role. And then your succession plan would then, if that successor does in fact move into a different role, now your succession plan should identify the next successor, get them trained up by the predecessor, so you still maintain that contingency plan. You still maintain your risk response. And so I don't think it's a bad thing. I don't think I think you promote it as a positive thing for the successor, that they don't have to necessarily be stepping into that role. It doesn't force them to have to step into that's their only path. That it just further enhances their abilities as an employee of the company.
Good stuff.
Matt and Rich, during your presentation, Matt, all these people were popping to mind for me. And then with the questions that Rich just asked, it just reinforced that for me with your response. I was thinking of a number of clients of mine and all the different scenarios. One of my clients, they're a manufacturer, and the owner was aging out. So he did what you said, Matt. He raised up someone from his organization that had been there a long time, and that was going to be his successor who was going to take over the company. And then what happened with what Rich just said happened. He stayed in the business too long. That person got antsy and got a better offer and ended up leaving. And so now the owner of the company, like 3 years later, he's still there running the company. He doesn't have anybody to take over for him. On the other hand, I have another manufacturer that his daughter is taking over the company. She's young, and all of the key leaders in the organization are older, and all of them, the whole entire C-suite is going to age out. And they expressed to me that they were concerned that when she took over the company, she wouldn't have the support system she needed and the expertise behind her to make her successful. And then I have another client that they are retiring in a couple years and don't have a successor in place and plan to sell the company. So they're working on their business right now to try to get it valued for sale and ready to sell. So that's an example where you don't have someone internally to hand off the business to. So I just wanted to share those 3 different examples, and those are all people that I think Matt could really be of value to.
I was going to say, Gina, you're queuing up some perfect examples for me to promote my own business. Yes, no, those are all, and I see all 3 of those scenarios you just described. I'm literally talking to business owners right now, and about those same situations. And yeah, those are all very common scenarios and ways that I do help out my clients. So yeah, and it's all things that can be properly addressed with a good succession plan, for sure. So yeah, it's I hear about it all the time. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, then we do thank everybody again, and look forward to having you attend our next webinar. Thanks.